the media and stuff have a sense of it like, oh, Christians are very judgmental. That's really sad. Because Paul's saying, hey, nobody has a right to come and judge a person. And what's interesting about that, if you think about it, it's also, you don't have even, God's saying, hey, it's not your role to judge yourself. Meaning, when you begin to condemn yourself in any way, that you kind of begin to beat yourself up in any way, Paul's saying, hey, that's not your role. You're not your evaluator. God's your evaluator. In the same way, when we think about how other people think about us, we begin to put them as the judge. We begin to put them as a person that's like, hey, this person knows my identity. They know what I'm supposed to be. This idea, I think the point this verse tries to get across is that ultimately, there's a great book up by this title. It says, we live for an audience of one. Like ultimately, the only person, the only being that you should be concerned about how they see you is God. That He's the only one in the audience in your life. Everybody else is not really an audience member. They're on stage with you. God is the only one that's out there in the audience. And the great thing about God, He's usually clapping and encouraging and trying to exhort you to give it your best shot as you're up there. What's interesting is that God is the audience. God is the audience of one. He's the one that can speak the truth into who you really are. Everybody else's thoughts about you are just people's opinions. Your own thoughts about you are just your own opinion of yourself. They're sometimes, most of the time, not entirely accurate. God's opinion of you is actually reality. So everybody else building your identity around your own opinions of yourself, or even others' opinions of yourselves, is kind of like building with a house of cards. Building with God's view of yourself, how God sees you, it's like building a house with like concrete and steel. It's not going anywhere. All those other opinions change throughout the day. When you have one conversation with somebody, or one day and then you have a conversation with them the next day, maybe you said something that rubbed them the wrong way. And all of a sudden, they're like, I don't like that person. Maybe in the morning you feel great about yourself. Maybe by the afternoon, you're like, oh, I suck at everything. And then at nighttime, you're like, oh, I'm okay. And so, your opinion about yourself goes up and down. God's view of you, it's constant. God's view, for those who follow Jesus, what it means is that God sees you through what Jesus has done on the cross. And God sees you as His beloved, His child. That's what it means to embrace what Jesus has done for us. We embrace how God ultimately sees us.
When I think about someone who faced major opposition, I think about the civil rights movement, and I think about Martin Luther King Jr., and, his philosophy was nonviolent protesting, and so he would go all around and do sit-ins and be participating in the bus boycott, and during the civil rights movement, he was jailed several times for participating in nonviolence, and there's an incident in Birmingham, Alabama, and he was sent to jail. And he received letters. And as you know, he's a Christian. He's a Christian man, a preacher, pastor. And when he was in jail, he received letters from other Christian leaders telling him, what are you doing involved in this? You should quit. Give up. Yeah, Christian leaders were telling him not to participate in the civil rights movement to bring people into freedom. That just shows you that you can't just listen to anybody's opinion, even if you think, you never know. And he stood for justice. And one of the biggest things he said was, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So he stood by that. But if he listened to what the other Christian leaders said and he pulled back, he wouldn't have paved the way for freedom and equality for all people today. So that just is a huge learning lesson to me about, imagine if you're in that situation, and like Ramir mentioned earlier, you are being persecuted, you're being hated for what you believe in. No matter what, if you listen to other people, you're just going to be swayed. If we listen to other people, we don't have a consistent path, but God, He tells us, I'm the only one who can condemn you. So even if other people are saying this and that, no, we don't have to listen to that. That's our only straight line.
And sometimes, we're not saying, hey, be ignorant of other people's thoughts or correction or insight into your life. But we are saying that ultimately, at the end of the day, when you wake up in the morning, the main question is like, hey, God, how, you're the only eyes I'm concerned about today. You're the only one that I want to fulfill, whatever you want me to do, God, I want to do that today. In Romans, Paul's in another section where he says, I do everything to the glory of God. And he's trying, what that big word means is that he's trying to do everything in a way that it just gets God excited. He wants to do a life that brings God joy. And usually those things that bring God joy bring us crazy joy. And he's trying to live this life that's not controlled by people's opinions. And sometimes in your guys' generation, sometimes it's not even people's opinions, but it's just the overall media, culture, experience you guys have. So sometimes who you are, it's not affirmed in any way, but what you see out there. And so if you begin to evaluate who you are, your worth, your value based on what the culture at large says it is, then you're building it on a deck of cards again. Instead, you embrace God's opinion of yourself. It says in the Bible that God's thoughts are as numerous as the sand on the seashore. That means that for every person in here, God has so many thoughts about you. Think about that. So many thoughts about you that can't be counted. You go to the sand here in the beach here in San Diego. I used to go to the sand, not the other way. But if you go to the beach here in San Diego and you walk on the beach, just remember, wow, God has more thoughts about me. Even when I don't even think about Him, even if you don't acknowledge Him, God's thinking about you. As we come to a close, we want you guys to know, hey, as you experience things that come your way, those aren't signs that God's not with you. Sometimes you can make a bad decision, you know what I mean? But sometimes you're going through life and things come your way. And when difficult things happen, it does not mean God's not with you. When you're struggling through something, you're trying to give your best, and it's hard, it does not mean God is not with you. Just because things are smooth, also does not mean God's with you. And so sometimes we think oh, everything's going great. It doesn't mean anything. God loves you. God's pursuing you. And God will meet you in any place you find yourself. The second thing is that, remember, as you go through the rest of this week, hey, just think about it this week. Let's not make it complicated. This week, what do you got? 3 more days, 4 more days. And so, because it depends on when you count. And so, that live it as if you're only concerned about God's in the audience. You live for just Him alone. And everybody else's opinion is who cares? Doesn't mean you're rude and you're, a jerk or anything like that. But what's interesting is if you are only concerned about God's opinion, you begin to become more loving to those around you. You're not concerned about impressing them. You're not concerned about, trying to show off or this or that. Or trying to yield so much that people will step all over you or something. But you're trying to serve. You're trying to love. You're trying to listen. You're trying to acknowledge them. You're trying to comfort them.